Hello, friends. This is Sam Cheney reporting for Weaponized News. Today is August 19th, 2024. Thank you for joining us on this Monday edition of Weaponized News. A lot to go over. Chicago's going crazy, of course, with the DNC there. It was just told to me by Simon that Republicans, wouldn't you know, maybe they are the fascists the left calls them, are calling for the National Guard to suppress the left-wing protest against the Democrats. It seems like they just refuse to win. You should never let your don't interrupt your enemy when they're destroying themselves, to paraphrase The Art of War. But who cares? We want a hardcore police state to quill the First Amendment, according to right-wingers. Some, anyway. Just idiocy on both sides, as per usual, I guess you could say. So we got that going on. They tore down the fences in some areas trying to break through. I think if we do see any violence, which most likely we will, it won't happen until after nightfall in Chicago there. There was many shootings this weekend. Nobody cares about that. But we'll see how it works out. I guess Biden is scheduled to speak tonight at the end. So we just decided to do the show rather than wait. Thankfully, Hillary Clinton, I wanted to delay the show to wait for Hillary Clinton's speech, but Simon said no, the show must go on. And so we're not going to be able to bring you live coverage of Hillary Clinton's speech that I know our audience was waiting to hear, as was I, to maybe hear a bit of witchcraft from her. And a bunch of other clowns, Democrat clowns. There's like 15, it's reported there's 15,000 journalists to cover the DNC there in Chicago. It's just ridiculous. Clown world. Why we put so much attention on this is just beyond me, man. It's all a ritual praising our own demise here. It's just truly, everybody should boycott the government at this point for all the crimes against humanity they've done against us, instead of praising them and giving them any time whatsoever, honestly. But we'll continue to report on all the corruption, call them out from both sides, as Weaponized News does. That's why we need you to go to weaponizednews.com/shop. Get some merchandise over there. Give us some shares on the social medias, because we're calling out both sides, left, right, and center. Taking no prisoners on Weaponized News. That's why you tune in to this program. As I continue to say, we know the large majority of the mainstream corporate CIA media is going to be supporting the establishment, Democrats. And then, of course, the large majority of your, quote, alternative media is supporting Trump and MAGA. And they're all full of shit, honestly. Excuse my French at this point. So that's why you have to tune into Weaponized News, where we shoot you straight as best we can. So let's get into this day in history on August 19th. This goes way back. We're looking at the history here. Back to the year 1263, King James I of Aragon censors Hebrew writing. So they were doing the noticing, as it's called on the interwebs, way back in 1263. Isn't that interesting? In the year 1692, they were looking for Hillary Clinton, but she wasn't around then. They had the Salem witch trials. 5 more people were hanged for witchcraft in Salem, Massachusetts. And now, witch covens such as the Wing, that Hillary Clinton is a proud member of, are praised in our media and our political parties. In 1839, this is a big one because it is World Photography Day and World Humanitarian Day. I forgot to mention at the very beginning. And we just learned that last year was the year of the most aid workers killed by guess who? So Louis de Grelles, if I pronounce that, I always screw up these foreign names. Photographic process with complete working instructions is published to the world quote, free to the world in Paris as a gift to the people by the French government. So at least offering something up to the people back then. After the French Revolution, of course, people, that kind of scared the government a little bit, I think, in 1839. And so we celebrate World Photography Day today in honor of giving away how to take a photograph in 1839. In 1848, it was announced gold is discovered in California. And on that note, gold has today, the spot price has held steady at over 2,500. I'm happy to report to you. So it looks like the gold price is maintaining at that very crucial price threshold to move on higher to bigger and better things, as the interest rate cuts are looming by the Federal Reserve in the background. In 1897, the first electric taxis were driven in London. 1897. Who killed the electric car? Hint, it was Rockefeller and the rest of the oil oligarchy. In 1941, Germany invades the Soviet Union. And of course, today, Ukraine has invaded the Soviet Union. Zelenskyy, we'll get to that, is essentially calling for World War III. He wants long-range striking capable weapons to be able to strike Moscow, which would essentially cause a Russian retaliation and kick off World War III. The democratically elected, oh no, I'm sorry, he is not democratically elected. So that's the theme of the American government is we don't support democracy, we support despotic dictators in America and around the world. And they scream at the top of their lungs democracy, but they're lying criminal scum. And that's who your government is. Sorry to tell you, Republicans, Democrats, and everybody else in between. In 1942, the Battle of Stalingrad began, where Germany invaded Russia and in that big battle and lost and got their butt kicked. So history tells us not a good idea to be invading Russia, but who cares? We're going to do it anyway. In 1960, CIA pilot convicted of spying by the USSR, Francis Gary Powers, served 17 months before he was exchanged for a Soviet spy. As the news is pumping today, the alternative media is pumping today, go live in Russia. They're widely accepting of Westerners for their Christian traditional values. Well, I would advise against that, as you will most likely be taken hostage and put to work in a forced labor camp, potentially executed or used as leverage for another prisoner exchange. So I'd be very careful about trusting Russia. I would trust them about as much as my own government, which is zero. We're in the negative. They gave me a negative social credit score. I give them a negative trust rating. In 1960, was the first commercial atomic reactor brought online by Yankee Atomic Electric Company. It was the first time an atomic reactor achieved a self-sustaining nuclear reaction. And that was in Deerfield, Massachusetts, 1960. And we're trying to decommission those as many as we can, as China is building them as fast as they can. And so we're racing toward net zero, and they're racing toward full development and to actually surpass the industrialized West. And we'll cheer it on because democracy, right? Actually, the UN Goals for Sustainable Development, the greatest proposal ever made to man. In 2010, Operation Iraqi Freedom winds down. Of course, we killed over 500,000 Iraqi children, praised by Madeleine Albright. And so, yeah. We also have, we got a lot of news today. We got the UK's a Fabian socialist utopia. We're going to illustrate that. Phil Donahue dies today at 88, HH. For those numerologists out there, rest in peace, Phil Donahue. And then we've got Aardvark News, of course, continuing the genocide at all costs and never-ending lies. So here's our intro. Our intro song. Let me back it up here. Beast in Black, Sweet True Lies, in honor of the DNC. Simon, how you doing this Monday? Are you excited as I am about Hillary Clinton speaking tonight at the DNC?
Yes. I have primed myself for that, but I am experiencing a dichotomy. I'm trying to resist socialism by drinking champagne, but then I realized it's rosé champagne, so it's kind of red, and so I feel that I may actually be a champagne socialist.
Hi, Bob. So they've torn down the fences, some of the fencing around the DNC. It's still daylight over there in Chicago. Mostly peaceful Antifa, far left-wing protesters. And you're telling me that the right wing are calling for the National Guard to come shut it down.
It is a particularly hilarious stunt. So obviously the Democrats are staging attacks on themselves in order that independents don't think that they are true communists, because if they were really communists, Kamala and her cabal, then why would communists be attacking her? But of course, it's all part of the deception plot. And Republicans, as usual, are completely falling into it and not only validating the deception, but actually calling for the deception to be cracked down upon even harder, which scares independents even more because it makes Republicans look more fascistic. So it is classic Republican stupidity, not only failing to recognize the trap, but even when it's chomped down on them, struggling harder and harder to get themselves further entangled in the teeth of the bear trap. Now, it should be pointed out, and forgive me for deviating from the script, but the 19th of August, today, is the anniversary, since you had just been doing the on this day information, of the 1953 British coup orchestrated by the MI6 and the CIA against the then Iranian Prime Minister, Mr. Mossadegh. And with no fucking self-awareness whatsoever. And if you look in your direct messages, you'll see that I sent you the link to the announcement that's just been put out jointly by the FBI, the Director of National Intelligence, and the CIA, literally warning us about, in America, about Iranian election interference on the anniversary of the CIA staged coup in Iran. I mean, these it literally, it's like these people are spoofing themselves. Can you just pull up that statement? I sent you the link to it.
Is this, it feels like some type of mocking ritual to be this bold.
Yeah. So if you click on the next bit in the embedded link
There
there,
you go, FBI.
and then click at the bottom of the picture.
Don't rate me, bro.
There we go. Office of the Director of National Intelligence, FBI, and actually, my mistake, it wasn't CIA, it's CISA, which is the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Administration, the people who told us last time that our elections were the safest that we'd ever had until 2022, when they were even safer. And now they are warning us about Iranian election interference, and they've got all kinds of phone numbers like 1-800 you are stupid and stuff like that you can call in to report it when you see somebody with a turban.
But we did a coup on Iran.
We lit on this day.
Yeah.
So you'll recall how they said that the Russians hacked the DNC servers. Okay. Mm-hmm. That information was given to Trump and was very, very helpful indeed, though it probably came from old, what was it, Seth Richards, right?
Seth Rich. We'll never know. Yeah, we'll never know.
Because he was killed, not from the actual Russians, right?
He was killed during a robbery where the robbers took none of his valuables.
And so, despite having been blamed for that and colluding with the Russians, the Trump campaign, never having seen a bear trap that they didn't want to test with their foot, are readily accepting that it's the Iranians who are now hacking their information on Vance and giving it to the DNC. It is unfreaking believable how they can be on the shitty end of the stick of that for 8 freaking years and then not see how it's now being done in reverse. Absolutely fucking staggering. These people are just total fucking morons, and they're relying upon the American public having the memory of a goldfish, and it's working. Congratulations, American public. If you're lucky, they'll clean your fish tank.
World Humanitarian Day is celebrated by the United Nations. Happy World Humanitarian Day. And we learn also out of the AP, UN says a record number of aid workers were killed in 2023, in large part in the aardvark.
And this year, not maybe higher, is higher. Is higher. So while the State Department is celebrating it, they're helping perpetuate the execution and massacre of journalists, one of whom was killed in Gaza this morning, and another one has, another very beautiful woman journalist, been shot in the back and apparently paralyzed. So nice to know that we're practicing what we preach, assuming that we're preaching Satanism.
Let's go to this horrific story. This young girl was sentenced to 11 years for killing her sex trafficker. And if you go through and read the story, it's her, Crystal Kaiser, and she killed her sex trafficker when she was 17. She's black, obviously. He was white, and he was filming his sexual abuse of her, and she killed him. But the prosecutors there in Kenosha County, Wisconsin, threw the book at her, charged her with 30 years for murder, and she went ahead and took a plea deal and got 11 years out of the deal. So pretty horrific story right here. The prosecutors were claiming that she killed him for his BMW, but he was also filming. They also had film of him sexually abusing her at 17. So
given the state and given the races involved, this is a curious tale. One would have to dig deeper before commenting on it extensively. There does appear to be some kind of grand theft auto involved. The other circumstances have allowed for it to be played down. It should be noted this occurred 7 years ago while she was a minor. That's frankly extraordinary that hasn't factored into it more prominently. She appears to have been charged as an adult. She's 24 now, but was 17 at the time this occurred, and was even younger when she was originally trafficked. Generally, if you're attempting to steal something, unless you have an ability to take it apart and sell it for parts, or to ship it in a container to Russia or Mexico, stealing cars is not the best way of doing it, especially if you then drive around in them and get caught.
I think it's a horrific story. There is more to it, possibly, but you would think that she would have taken it to trial, but I think they scared her with the 30
Well,
years.
no, even the reduced charge carried a maximum of 30 years.
Mhm. That's scary. So plead down to 11.
And if she's been on remand for God knows how many years, she may be out in 2 or 3, right? But one also has to question why it's taken 7 years and it hasn't even gone to trial. That's a long time.
It is.
On a murder charge.
Quick and swift justice, as in the UK, we're going to get to. They're serving that up. Okay, this story, we covered it, but national, I guess it's still in the news. National Public Data admits hackers stole Social Security numbers in massive data breach affecting nearly all Americans.
It now appears to be confirmed, and it is indeed pretty much the entire population of the United States.
And so are they going to use this as an excuse to roll out some new, because now your Social Security number has been compromised, as if it hasn't already before, but now it's official. Everybody's Social Security has been compromised. Are they going to use this to roll out a new digital ID that will never be compromised?
Whether I rolled out a new digital ID or not, I would use this as a reason for zeroing out Social Security, which is obviously completely unfunded. Because nobody's really sure who is owed what. So let's just call it zero for everyone. Seems to be a good case of equity where we have an equal outcome. Everyone gets fucked, and that would be equal.
As they continue to pull Social Security out of your paycheck. Quick reminder here about tomorrow in Florida are the primaries, very late. We're campaigning for...
And Alaska.
In Alaska,
and the person, if they're in the right congressional district, that they may wish to consider voting for, as opposed to the person who likes wearing his IDF uniform in Congress, is Rick Wiles in his primary campaign against Brian Mast. And that's in the Port St. Lucie area.
Okay, reminder on that. Evangelicals for Harris say that Trump is a false prophet. What do we make of this?
It sounds very anti-Semitic against the King of Israel to me.
There you go. That's good enough for me. Okay, honoring Phil Donahue, the TV show host of a daytime TV show pioneer, some are claiming, is dead at 88 years old.
88, and it's very kind of him to wait till he was 88 in order to give us the HH salute.
Here is a flashback from one of his shows before the media was totally bought off by Big Pharma. Let's watch this short clip.
Need audio.
I'm scared, and I'm scared to vaccinate her, which is why I didn't vaccinate her in the first place, and which led me to read about the warnings that are out there. And what I've learned are there warnings about introducing these alien microorganisms into our children's blood and the long-term effects, which could be trivial or they could be quite hazardous, and they could be just allergies or asthma or sleep disorders, or they could be cancer, leukemia, multiple sclerosis, sudden infant death syndrome. It's very scary and it's very serious, and I think because I felt wrong doing it, that's why I didn't do it. And You know, I mean, we have to think twice. Why are our children getting these diseases? Why?
And what is the biochemical legacy of the vaccination? How long does it last, and what might it be its effect?
Yes.
Yeah, you're putting something into your baby's bloodstream. Everybody ought to think about that twice.
We
yeah.
get this official stamp, and someone's designated to give us this information, which isn't really known about or researched, you know, and we find out the hard way, you know. No one knew that, you know, the pill in its original state, you know, for women, birth control, I don't want to get into this is a big one, but was so detrimental to health and the hormonal imbalance and all of the above. Let's bring out John Robbins. He knows all this stuff.
All right.
But you should be able to believe these people that are telling us what is good for us. Why?
We
Because
should be,
they're our brother
exactly.
man. Yet that's not the case.
Yeah.
Well, look, what I see is that a new era is coming. I think you might call it the 90s era, but it's a new era for the planet. Which thinking is shifting from profit and seeing success as how much money you have in the bank, and into seeing success as what a difference you make with other people and with yourself. I think that's a shift that is happening.
And so you're not allowed to say that on television, and you're barely even allowed to say that on the internet anymore.
Several takeaway points there. So, one, the final gentleman speaking is actually the man from the Addams family.
It is, yeah.
All right. So,
Yeah.
take that for what you wish. And the way I would, the boy's correct, or young man, in saying that these things hadn't been researched, because that was part of the 1986 Vax Act, was that they promised that they would research everything to validate the safety profiles, which they then never did.
And bring it back to Congress every year to review.
Yeah, so that's absolutely critical, right? That they promised something as part of the deal and then never fulfilled their side of the bargain, which was a Faustian bargain to start with. And then Faustian as opposed to Faucian. And could actually have been both. And what she's essentially saying, and it would have been appropriate had Donahue made this comment, though his follow-up I thought was entirely valid and respectful, was she was essentially describing mother's intuition. It was her internal warning signal going, do not do this, do not do this. And when, as a young mother, you have something that is screaming at you to not do to your child, despite what the guy in the lab coat is telling you, who may actually have been experimenting on rats earlier in the day.
Or children, other children.
It's generally something that should be paid close attention to when your body is telling you, through all of your generations of inherited genetic knowledge, not to do what they're proposing.
And everybody should ask themselves, why are we not allowed to have this conversation anymore? Something's there, but we're not allowed to have this conversation. They'll ban you, man.
Well, Bobby Kennedy is trying to have it,
Yeah.
and he's being portrayed as a madman just for wanting to discuss it. And it should be remembered by all those MAGA people out there, Trump's own child was disabled by this, and he didn't just backstab Bobby Kennedy, but he betrayed his own last-born son. So when you're thinking about whether or not he'll keep his promises to you, he hasn't even kept his promises to his last wife and his last child, let alone you, who he's never met and wouldn't piss on you if he met you burning on the pavement.
Well, here's more evidence why we should trust all medical is this story of the Miami Herald. Hospital removed part of man's skull temporarily, then they lost it. Lawsuit says, of course, he's suing them. So we do appreciate that from Miami. Here's somehow there's this fund, the pandemic fund that old Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen is going to tell us all about.
Ministries came together in record time to launch the pandemic fund to address the critical gaps in pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response revealed by the COVID-19 pandemic. The Pandemic Fund has since accomplished an extraordinary amount in an extremely short time. In just 2 years, it's raised nearly $2 billion from 25 countries and 3 philanthropies, and leveraged an additional $2 billion in financing from countries and implementing partners like the multilateral development banks and the World Health Organization. With these funds, it launched 2 calls for proposals and has already provided over $330 million for projects across 37 countries that will tangibly improve our collective ability to prevent and prepare for future health shocks. This fall, the Pandemic Fund will award an additional $500 million to new projects. As we look ahead, we need to make sure the Pandemic Fund is equipped with the resources it needs. Last September, when I spoke at the 1-year anniversary of the launch of the Pandemic Fund, I emphasized that health emergencies are first and foremost a human tragedy, and they also impact all aspects of the economy. We know that a fully resourced pandemic fund will benefit the American people and people around the world by mitigating the immense human and economic costs we've seen from pandemics like COVID-19. The Pandemic Fund's new strategic plan includes developing a sustainable resource mobilization plan. The United States is urging existing donors to increase their contributions and is calling for support from new partners so the Pandemic Fund can reach our goal of an additional at least $2 billion in direct contributions and at least $2 billion in co-financing and continue its crucial work. We're also committed to leading by example. Today, I'm proud to announce that the United States intends to pledge up to $667 million, or 1/3 of the Pandemic Fund's $2 billion goal, to support the Pandemic Fund through 2026.
Notice there, 666 million rounded up. I mean, it's right in your face.
And
right?
they did 33 too. They did the 33 too.
They did a third, 33.3, and they rounded up the 666 million to 667 million. I mean, it's literally, you've got to see that it's just mocking you to your face, right?
Bob says all aspects to this, all aspects to all this is aardvark. Yeah, I would say so there, Bob.
Well, Janet Yellen is of a particular faith, and one should note that the best way of reducing human infection is to reduce the humans.
That's one way of looking at it. Quickly on this, we're not going to cover it, spend too much time, but the Republican Oversight Committee has finally come around to issue a strongly worded report on
300-page report
on Biden impeachable offenses after he's already been retired, essentially. And so thank you very much for that, GOP. Ridiculous.
Interestingly enough, there were several U-Haul vehicles outside the White House today, and that triggered speculation, not just that he was moving more top-secret documents to his garage in Delaware in order to sell to the Chinese, but that actually that in his farewell speech tonight, he might actually stand down and effectively make her president immediately.
That would be something. Okay, let's go to weaponizednews.com/shop. Weaponizednews.com/shop. Give us a share. on your social medias. Please, thank you for everyone that does give us the shares, that does buy some merchandise, and does give us some donations. However you may want to fund us or help us out through the shares, really helps every little bit. Only you can break through the censorship algorithms. Okay, Simon,
We
we're
should point out we're not being funded by InQtel, despite my best efforts.
not being funded by the Russians, the CIA, or anybody else. It's just us and you out there, audience. So that's why we're able to bring you independent reporting and analysis like no one else on the interwebs. And I'm still saying, regardless of what old Alex Jones says, it wouldn't be a good idea to go to Russia and try to live a traditional lifestyle.
The problem with Alex Jones pushing that is, as we know well, he hates to read, doesn't like reading beyond the headlines, and therefore didn't notice that in the penultimate paragraph, even of the original story from TASS, which apparently is now incredibly reliable, he failed to notice that the new visas that had not even yet had their full conditions expressed, but that Putin has mentioned allegedly, are not 2-year temporary residence permits, but are in fact 3-month visas. 3 months. Okay?
Right there, you
so
can
I
see
would
it.
suggest
Yeah.
that it's best not to renounce your US citizenship, sell everything, and go and throw your hands into the clutches of Russian organized crime. When your visa is valid for 3 months, you then find that the US government's cancelled your passport, you can't fly home, and you become stateless. So, notwithstanding its endorsement from Alex Jones, who has never ever steered anyone wrong in his 25 years on social media, do not do that without thinking long and frickin' hard about what you're going to do when you're essentially a Palestinian and have no state and no passport.
Maybe that's his backhanded move to get people to feel the plight of the Palestinians.
Now, in terms of actually bringing lots of white Christian people into Russia, is the idea bad? No, from the Russian point of view, it's great. You then have to look at the conditions, and there are statehood conditions, which is basically that you help them repopulate Siberia. So if you're coming from Florida or Texas, you may find that Siberia is not as warm and sunny as you might have anticipated, assuming that you'd never watched any Russian movie involving snow.
Not the most hospitable. We see this report out of Zero Hedge, U.S. leading.
And then bear in mind that if you do get a temporary permanent residence visa, that attached to that visa is going to be your conscription notice to go and fight other Americans in Ukraine. So overall, maybe worth passing on this one for the time being, but I am looking forward to watching Alex's broadcast from Siberia with Russian subtitles, which ironically is what I advised him to do in terms of fleeing to Costa Rica about 3 years ago. I even sent him the information for how to enroll in a jungle warfare course just so he was prepared for it. But obviously I was ignored once again, and now he's one of America's most indebted people, given the size of the outstanding claims against him.
Along with Trump. Zero Hedge tells us leading economic indicators are getting worse than the lockdown, actually. And you can see on this chart.
Yeah, they're on a par with the 2008 subprime mortgage meltdown and COVID. Just so that's not readily clear to people, that generally means you're fucked. So that's not good.
They're going to try to gas the markets for the Democrats, but I don't know. I honestly don't know if it will work. Okay, quickly on the DNC, we're not going to get that much into it. We're going to mourn that we couldn't cover Hillary live, but it's reported here now out of Yahoo News that some 15,000 journalists, imagine if there was this much attention on something that actually mattered in this country, we'd have real change. But we have to go cover the clown world DNC. 15,000 journalists are expected to show up there to cover this
There's
event.
probably more journalists than there are Democrats there,
They're
let alone communists.
Well,
right?
they are Democrats, so it's
Well,
essentially
no, the
the same thing.
journalists are communists, but actually they're Fabians, so they don't reveal themselves until the end game is displayed.
There you go. It's an opportunity to witness history, Chris Como said. And so why anybody gives a F about what Chris Como has to say is beyond me, but now he's on this headline news, and so the propaganda must march on. Conservative Republican, here's CNN, some who cares about this? I never even heard of this judge, but they're saying conservative Republican endorses Harris, and it was supposedly this judge, Judge J. Michael Luttig, prominent.
So a retired judge. How does this guy have any sway whatsoever?
I don't know, but we're praising him at CNN. So anyway, I just want to show that little bit of propaganda.
So he's part of the Christians for Harris.
Yes, indeed. And this sad story to report: John Fetterman by Just News is telling us will not be attending the DNC, and so that's very sad. I was looking forward to hear what John Fetterman, the intellectual
Does he actually
giant,
know that he's not attending it?
He may not, but I was looking forward to his wisdom that we will not get from the DNC.
Is he sending his wife instead?
No, they just will not.
If I had to press the flesh, I'd prefer it to be with her than him.
Indeed. Okay, the prisoners here. We got the video here. The UK is releasing 5,000 prisoners to make room for anti-immigration protesters. Some of those are violent offenders. Let's watch this.
And we have this clip which is particularly disturbing. So people should pay close attention.
We will guarantee a prison cell. We will make sure that those people who need to be in prison will be in prison, not necessarily in the area where they live. They may be 200-300 miles away from home, but we will guarantee people a prison cell.
The numbers are so tight there. How can you make that guarantee?
They are tight, and that's why we've initiated Operation Early Dawn. So basically, the easiest way to describe it is 1 in, 1 out. So as people get released, we can then pick up people from police cells and take them to court, and we will triage that 3 times a day. We will.
Okay, so just to go there. So this guy is representing the current communist government of Britain, all right? He's talking about early dawn. What he actually means is red dawn, okay? So if you see people parachuting out of the skies, they may actually be North Koreans, Cubans, or Russians. And in this case, they're talking about taking people out of remand cells, so where they've been held in detention without bail because they put out nasty tweet messages, right? This is what he's talking about. And on the basis of some crazy, head-chopping person being released after having served 40%, not 2/3, 40% of their original sentence for serious crimes in many cases, right? In order to put pensioners, and there are people being convicted 69, 70, 71, right, for having put out tweets, getting 2 or 3 years. And when he says triage, that's like you do in a medical mass casualty situation where you essentially, I understand this very well, where you essentially decide between those who can live or die, exercising the power of Jesus, because you can't save everyone. So you're classifying them into kind of the green, yellow, red, and black scenario. Black is already dead. Red is likely to die. Yellow is messed up, and green is walking wounded. So that's obviously what they were doing during the pandemic period. They were triaging people. Are they disabled? What's their quality of life? What's their age? What's their income? And if you fail any one of those tests, you're put straight into the crematoria, so to speak, or the death pile. And he's talking about massively violating people's human rights, because normally you would be imprisoned such that you can maintain contact with your family, which is particularly important for maintaining the mental health of children, should any exist. And he's just saying, whatever, we'll send people whatever, wherever, 200 or 300 miles away from their local communities. But the key point there is they're taking people out of the prison remand cells, which is where literally people haven't been sent to local jail on bond. They're being held in the police holding cells. Okay, the police holding cells. They take them for summary trial where they're persuaded to plead guilty and not released for a month on bail pending an appeal or pending the probation service report. They're immediately sentenced and immediately transported to a prison hundreds of miles away from their family and their lawyers. Okay? And that is what they are boasting about on British morning TV.
It's a Fabian socialist utopia. Here's the new UK Prime Minister. Let's listen to this short clip about how they're all the white people are racist.
Northern Ireland here today for three purposes. Firstly, to meet the PSNI officers who've been on the front line during this disorder. Many of them have been injured. And my purpose was to say to them, thank you for what they have done. We make big asks of them, they step up, and they deserve our thanks. I've also had the chance to speak to the PSNI senior leadership about the challenges that they face and the support that they need. And then third and very importantly, to speak to some of the communities most impacted about the fear that they have, the anxiety that they have about the recent disorder. The disorder is intolerable. It is incapable of justification. It's clearly racist, and it does not represent the modern, forward-looking Northern Ireland.
Wasn't it all engineered by the government?
No, I have to explain that because people won't understand a lot of context there. So the PSNI, and that was the logo behind them, is the Police Service of Northern Ireland. Okay, and the disturbances that he said are unjustifiable, which predetermines that there are no mitigating circumstances, which is an inappropriate comment from a politician who, in theory, could be involved in the pardon or sentencing process, right, is overshadowing the reality, which is that the people in not only Northern Ireland, but also the Republic of Ireland, irrespective of whether or not you have a view on whether or not it should be one island, okay? Much like the Halo science fiction series, where the Galactic Federation has been fighting, much like in 1984, the book, against the rebels for as long as anyone can remember, and without anybody actually really remembering the cause of the dispute, they suddenly find that they're fighting aliens. Keir Starmer is the World Economic Forum sponsored alien life form who's been parachuted into your leadership. And that is why Roman Catholics and Protestants have made common cause. Because just like in Halo, they realized that humanity had to fight against the alien life forms in order to survive. That is what is happening there, and that is what people need to understand, okay? It is literally your implacable enemy for centuries is now your life support, because the threat is so overwhelming. That's the only way you have any chance of surviving.
Yeah, many people say that the Christians and Muslims are going to come together against aardvarks as well. So that's that same type of thinking. Okay, let's move on here, Simon. To the guy that coined mass formation psychosis, Desmet here. You put out this.
So this
post?
is Professor Matthias Desmet, who I do like. wrote a great book that he changed the title, shit title in English. But he's basically the author of the concept of mass formation. Now, he has twerked and tweaked it. And when I say twerking in this case, it's amending it slightly as opposed to shaking your naked ass. And he may do that, but I haven't seen that. And he's put out this long thread mini essay once again, and he is worth following. He is operating as a university professor in Belgium, having written this extremely impressive book in order to save his job and his tenure at the University, I think, of Ghent. He actually had to agree not to teach from his own book. Okay, so you've got to understand that we're dealing with a hostage situation, right? So I commented on his mini essay, and like many other of these stories where the headline is unsupported by the text or the reference documents, in this case, despite that he's relying heavily upon Arendt, who interestingly was saved by an American journalist from transportation to Nazi death camps in 1942 and 1943 as a French Jew. There's also the figure of Rousseau. So those are two famous figures in the literature regarding totalitarianism. In Arendt's case, post-1945, and in Rousseau's case, largely reflecting upon the French Revolution. Okay, so with that context, let's actually go through his essay, because it's very, very interesting until we get to the end, when he essentially makes a logic error, which is not to say that it disproves the preceding paragraphs, but it is a good example of the type of critical analysis that we do here that many, many, many other organizations won't do, and Jones will just read the headline. Now, I was the first person, I woke Jones's assistant producer up at 3 a.m., freaking out when Desmet first put out the phrase mass formation, and I'd read his first explanation of it, and I thought it was absolutely sensational and such a brilliant synopsis. But I couldn't get them to embrace it for weeks. Now, that may be more of a reflection upon me than them, but our audience can make their own judgments about that. But anyway, so he says, "Dear friends, things are getting quite interesting in the mainstream media. Here and there, something real is seeping through the omnipresent facade." I read in the New York Times that Maureen Dowd had said that Biden was removed from the presidential race through a coup or overthrow. And he's suggesting that's an isolated article amongst the vast sea of media content, which in and of itself is only true if you're only regarding the mainstream media and ignoring all the foreign media, because the Chinese and the Russians and the Indians have been saying that for weeks. For a man who speaks French, Flemish, and English very well, it's surprising that he's ignoring the foreign media. But he goes on to say, the content of the original article goes like this: Biden fell victim to an actual conspiracy of Obama, Pelosi, Schumer, and Jeffries. I would agree with the first three, not necessarily Jeffries, but it's definitely a valid opinion. On the alternative media, this conclusion was reached much earlier. The way Biden was removed from the race bears the characteristics of a coup. And Biden, in his recent CBS interview, has clearly indicated that. Okay? The conclusion was drawn from a series of factors, including the fact that in the first few days after the withdrawal, neither Biden himself nor people in his entourage publicly communicated about the withdrawal from the race, except through a letter signed by Biden, as if he had a gun to his head. Even Nancy Pelosi commented on the fact that the letter didn't appear to be consistent with how Biden speaks. But Biden speaks in gibberish, and so does she. So that's a blind person leading blind in that scenario. We then learned from a journalist having had an elevator ride in a shared condo in Washington, D.C., with the person who actually wrote that statement from Biden that our audience will recall was put out with no letterhead, not on the White House account, not on the President Biden account, but on the personal Joe Biden account. It was so bizarre that the Associated Press actually asked for the White House to authenticate the document. Okay, so he doesn't explain any of that, but that's where he's coming from there. Okay, so he then goes on to say, it is a problem that a number of influential Democratic figures force Biden behind the scenes to withdraw. But irrespective of the reasons and the process, there are clearly exceptionally sound reasons in medical terms for why that was necessary. And if he hadn't done it under pressure and or voluntarily, then it would have been justified, in my opinion, to use the 25th Amendment. So when one talks about process, you can threaten to use process in order to achieve an outcome. That's like any plea deal any day. Okay, so it's possible to criticize that, but not necessarily valid. Was Biden democratically elected? Please just scroll back up again one paragraph. Now that's a good point, isn't it? Because here Professor Desmet is saying Biden, quote, Biden was indeed democratically elected. Was he, or was that stolen? In this particular example, he's talking about as the nominee. Once again, a completely stitched up process like with Bernie Sanders against Hillary. Okay. RFK got forced out of the party. Marianne Williams and Dean Phillips got massively excluded from any publicity whatsoever by the mainstream media. Kamala Harris was not democratically nominated at all. That is undoubtedly true. The choice of Harris, to put it mildly, is remarkable. She had little to no grassroots support within the Democratic voter base. Her knowledge of crucial aspects of the state system and key societal issues, such as the pressing phenomenon of inflation, seemed almost non-existent. And nature certainly did not endow her with rhetorical prowess. Now, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. She does speak in very short sentences, incredibly simplistically. And as Alexander Dugin has also put out in his article, suggesting that her candidacy is deliberately designed to appeal to the idiocracy, which, Sam, you obviously have proposed on several occasions, appears to be entirely valid. So I think our professor here, with an IQ probably of over 150, is not quite fully appreciating the appeal to the idiocracy, which is very, very important. If the only thing they can do is vote uniformly down the ballot. So he then goes to say that either the Democrats had an incredible poverty of available candidates, which is not necessarily true, but certainly the way they presented it. They believe blindly in the propaganda machine. That is definitely true. That it's being mobilized so that they dare go to the elections with just about anyone. What's the saying that you have about voting for Democrats, Sam?
Vote blue no matter who.
Vote blue no matter who. That's exactly what he's saying there. But you came up with that without having an IQ. Well, maybe you do have an IQ of 150, but you don't have full tenure at the University of Ghent. Just goes to show that maybe you should. If they fire him, you should definitely apply. And I'm not being insulting or facetious in any way there. He says that a combination of these two factors seems most plausible. And who am I to disagree on that point? Certain aspects of the propaganda machine is used to influence elections, which have already been extensively documented. And there we have CISA, the Director of National Intelligence, and the FBI telling us don't worry. The only propaganda you're receiving is from the Iranians, and your taxpayer dollars are working hard in order to uncover and defeat that. So don't worry about Kamala's cackling in that regard.
I'm relieved.
And we are greatly relieved that we're only receiving the straight truth from the only reliable organization, being the Democrat National Committee. Skillfully guided by Google and, as he says, their other popular internet applications, who were originally funded by the US State Department, which is not quite true because it often was In-Q-Tel, which was the investment arm of the CIA. So you can see when you really parse this and understand the background that, one, he's avoiding mentioning organizations like the CIA, which are getting flagged and targeted, possibly banned from flying to America. But also, he's really misleading you a little bit, because even the Global Engagement Center, which is the propaganda arm, along with the National Endowment for Democracy of the State Department, are clearly not as powerful as the deep state as reflected in the intelligence community. So he does talk about the US State Department being a extraordinarily useful propaganda tool. I think he may be thinking more about in terms of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, in terms of kind of Voice of America and things like that, who, of course, it should be recalled, none other than Tucker Carlson's father worked for at least a decade. So when you're looking to him to save you, you might want to bear that in mind. Like, in many ways, Alex, once again, relying upon Robert Malone, who not only was instrumental in inventing the mRNA vaccines that he repeatedly tells us about and Jones repeatedly ignores, but that he was also highly influenced by both his father and his father-in-law, both of whom worked for the deep state in decades, but were now led to believe that, despite the fact that he's still able to maintain a massive ranch in Virginia, where I'm guessing that a stone-built horse breeding ranch does not run cheap, much like Lou Jobs was somehow able to maintain, Lou Dobbs, formerly of CNN, but also notwithstanding the crushing tax regime in the communist state of California, Dr. Malone and his lovely wife are also able to maintain another very, very large establishment in communist California, despite now apparently being the enemy of the deep state. I think when people see them running households either in Maryland or Virginia or Washington or Oregon or California, you really might be justified in questioning, are the deep state really against you at that point? They can't tuck you up somehow with code enforcement or on your property taxes or your personal income taxes.
Careful, Simon. He'll sue anybody that disagrees with him.
Well, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with him. I'm just saying that he's a lying scumbag.
Oh, okay.
So just to be clear on that point. But unfortunately, Jones is now massively relying upon him. And who knows, I suspect that his third business may not be despunking horses, but might in fact be helping people fill out their Russian immigration papers. And why not? Because that seems like an entirely reasonable line of business to go into if both of your parents work for the deep state. But that aside. So he's now, Professor Desmet, having returned from my minor digression, he's saying that propaganda is not primarily the art of lying. It is the art of psychological manipulation. It is primarily the art of directing attention, or in some cases, redirecting attention. Propaganda ensures that you notice certain aspects of reality and not others. This is all in line with the cognitive warfare that we have been warning our audience about in the form of the new NATO, since September, the new NATO artificial intelligence cognitive warfare system known as Merlin. Okay. Which, of course, we can never prove which of the 32 countries is actually running it, so there's no accountability whatsoever. And it is more suited to that than a search engine. Google is nowadays the great other that answers all of your questions, but not necessarily correctly. he does gloss over Google for some reason. The answer is far from objective or neutral. Google more frequently directs you to desired narratives than to undesirable ones. And sometimes the disbalance is quite outspoken, though very few people notice it. And live on air, I did an experiment in the past with Harrison Smith, also of InfoWars, the American journal, where I had him search a key term on Google, which amazingly he was using up until like the end of 2023, as opposed to Brave or DuckDuckGo, when it was still reliable, as opposed to the new modified app version. And even he, at the time, was shocked how the top 10 answers were radically different. So if any of our audience are mistakenly, and I appreciate this may be an innocent mistake, using Google to search some of the phrases that we often refer them to, wake the fuck up, because if I learn who you are, I'll block you because of your stupidity. Because you are clearly being misinformed. But in this case, continuing with his essay, he goes on to say, to give just one example, in the days following the attack on Trump, it was signaled frequently that the search term assassination attempt in America yielded little to no results referring to the assassination attempt on Trump. Instead, one would get content referring to all sorts of other assassination attempts. If we could scroll down, please, and this isn't too long, but it is important. This guy's, you know, a big cheese in the kind of Q alternative media. I'm pretty sure he's been on Jones a couple of times. I've referred to him, read his book. I mean, he's an interesting guy. I'm not attacking him in all regards.
No, he gave everybody a theory or a phrase to nail down how people are acting during the medical intervention period.
But possibly in response to my polite criticism, he did modify that, where he changed the numerical breakdown of society from 30-40-30 to 30-60-10, where that breakdown was the zealots signing up to the deep state, the fence sitters, and the resistors. So the final number that he came up with was 10%, which was consistent with what Celeste Bishop Salom, who unfortunately now is behind a paywall, but before her husband was poisoned and killed, had been quite vocal in expanding upon all of her experience for having worked for FEMA for a couple of decades, was driven out of the state of Montana, believe it or not. Can't remember where she ended up. But she literally was banned from every single supermarket in Montana. So when people think that Montana is a good Republican state and you're safe, just because she was criticizing the vax mandates and the mask requirement in order to go into supermarkets, she, in her 60s, a good Christian woman, was banned from every supermarket in Montana, which, when her husband was then subsequently poisoned and basically executed in a hospital, she found that her organic homestead became unmanageable and she had to flee the state. Very, very tragic circumstances. But she pointed out that not only was FEMA relying upon only 10% of the US population resisting their edicts when empowered by people like President Trump on the 18th of March 2020, but that also they had calculated, and people will recall this in terms of the 3%ers, that only 3%, which is coincidentally the number of the population that was believed to have actually fought against the American
fought against the redcoats.
The redcoats and their American supporters, as opposed to the revolutionaries. That was deemed to be roughly 3% of the population who actively resisted them. Most of the people waited to see what the outcome was, and that was why Desmet belatedly transferred some of the percentage such that it became from 30% resistors to 10% resistors, and the 20% difference was put into the sit on the fence and don't risk your neck and wait and see what happens. And indeed, that is what we've seen in the political discourse in the United States, where the breakdown of the registered voters has gone from a third, which is almost 66.6, but obviously that doesn't work when you're trying to add up to 100. So now we're told it's a third. Not that America's satanic in any way whatsoever, allegedly. But now it's 25, 50, 25. So that's interesting as well, albeit it's not 30, 60, 10. So 30, 60, 10 is where he's next at. But even then, the 10 is wrong, because that should be broken into 7 and 3. 7 are the people who talk about resisting, and 3 are the people who are actually so motivated that they'll take up arms in order to overthrow their oppressors. So unfortunately, when you lump the fence sitters with the zealots, you end up with 3% against 90%. So you're outnumbered 30 to 1. Not a good operational balance, just in case our people are thinking about that whilst they're doing some of their bench reloading sessions. This suggests that on the whole, the attack on Trump was a deep state orchestrated publicity campaign. The attack on Trump was indeed extremely good publicity for Trump, but not only did the establishment minimize that, but he completely blew it. Right? Within 2 weeks, he was rambling about how good Operation Warp Speed was, and completely gave up on his fist-pumping kind of like resist iconography that would have carried him to the presidency.
The greatest loss of political capital in history.
Absolutely staggering. So whether you believe that it was contrived or a genuine assassination attempt, one does have to question the good faith of his campaign staff, that he deviated from that election winning rhetoric, and all he needed to do was no more campaign events and just pump that fist everywhere that he went, and that would have carried him to victory. Absolutely incredible. It says, while the manipulation of search strategies about the assassination attempt was somewhat speculative, the same is not true when talking about 2020 elections. He refers to Mike Pence, that I've had a great deal of interaction with. He's now gone to a largely paywall model. He did that interview with Tucker, and that has propelled him into the riches, irrespective of what his lifestyle might be, somehow maintaining a house in Hollywood and in Miami, where there are quite large gay minorities. Not that I'm making any conclusions based upon that. But he also had years working for the Department of Homeland Security and in the White House. So he's not deep state at all, not gay at all. Now you have to pay to hear what he has to say. He now ignores the comments that I send him, despite asking me to send him all of my tips, which he then uses and doesn't give me credit for. But apart from that, entirely reliable. And I honestly do have no personal knowledge about his sexuality whatsoever.
I hope not.
And I can confirm that he hasn't recently tried to fuck me. It seems that the enormous propaganda machinery might even be able to achieve the impossible, making a candidate without grassroots supports, otherwise known as Kamala Harris, or the cum bucket, acceptable without any rhetorical talent. But that ignores what Dugin is saying.
That ignores idiocracy.
Which ignores the idiocracy. And so I appreciate we're laboring this point, but just to explain what we're doing here. So I'm skipping through these paragraphs from a Belgian professor that you may or may not have heard of or seen on InfoWars, okay? And then comparing and contrasting and combining the thesis with the antithesis from a Russian professor in order to form a synthesis live on air. And I would just ask if your beloved at the Q or at InfoWars or at The Last American Vagabond or Tucker or Joe Rogan is able live on air to synthesize an essay written by a Belgian professor with a essay written by a Russian professor live on air. Okay. Then when you're considering whether you should retweet this broadcast, or even better, donate $6.66 on a monthly recurring basis, ideally done at 6 minutes past 6 o'clock on the 6th of the month, just to really, make it extra satanic, in a jest or mockery, not because we are following the Church of Satan, then please, that is the extreme differential that you are experiencing by listening to this broadcast. No one, even people that I have the utmost respect for, are doing this, and they're certainly not doing it live. Okay. So he goes on to say that the enormous propaganda machinery might be able to achieve the impossible, making a candidate without grassroots support and without significant intellectual abilities be the president of the United States. Apparently, he's never heard of Ronald Reagan. I mean, he's younger than me, so
or George Bush,
or George Bush, or George Bush, for that matter. So this wouldn't be the first. Okay. The Democratic Party's America is rapidly discarding any democratic character and transforming more and more into a fully developed totalitarian structure. So this is a key point here that we're seeing in Britain as well. It's very important to notice these changes and decide where your red line is. Okay? Because it is death by 1,000 cuts, and you have to draw a red line somewhere.
Maybe
Under
in socialism.
Yeah, it's beyond socialism. It became more or less normal to prosecute and imprison political opponents and dissident journalists, and help create social support for the assassination attempt on Trump. He incited violence against the people of the MAGA movement in a barely concealed way, and in true totalitarian style, he, Biden, kept the numerous and possibly justified legal allegations against him, Biden, and his family members out of the media, notwithstanding that Jim Jordan rather belatedly has produced a 300-page report on the impeachable adventures of Biden, now that it's utterly irrelevant. So thank you very much for spending our taxpayer dollars on producing something that's now utterly moot. Though having said that, the Supreme Court has basically indicated that impeachment is the only way of holding presidents accountable, because they've essentially indicated that anything Trump did is immune from prosecution. So maybe that point is more important than I've given it credit to in the first reading. If you could scroll up once again, please. Up. No, I want to see the next paragraphs. Keep going. There we go. Okay, thank you. Continues, Professor Desmet, the totalitarian censorship there entered the next stage. And it's important, like I just said, to recognize all of these stages. People who articulated a dissident opinion on social media are now being imprisoned almost arbitrarily, like the United Kingdom. In some cases, the posts indeed incite violence to some extent, but in other cases, it's hard to detect anything in the post that could be legally sanctionable. Now, once again, we have to analyze that phrase there. Anything can be legally sanctionable if the powers that be determine that it is unlawful and they exercise their prosecutorial discretion in order to make you a target of investigation. So his phrase there, legally sanctionable, is weak at best. Okay? Is it immoral? Is it unethical? Those are possibly more important phrases. As we've seen in Britain with the online security, and in Australia with the online safety, and in Ireland and in Canada, almost anything can be made illegal, and indeed the thought of doing something that might be illegal could in and of itself be illegal, in much the way that we had displayed to us by Tom Cruise not relying upon his experience in Scientology whatsoever, allegedly, and not informing us of the possibility of thought crimes. Okay. He said, this is exactly what the legislator announces. The post doesn't have to be illegal for social media platforms to be forced to censor it. But who was it who told us from X that it didn't necessarily have to be illegal for them to throttle it? Right? Do you remember that phrase?
Yacarino said that.
Remember that phrase that she used?
Freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach.
There you go. So once again, he's ignoring that. Okay? In this way, the totalitarian system achieves something typical. It cancels every law. For example, see Solzhenitsyn's "There is no law." Well, that's not that there is no law. It's that the law becomes irrelevant, and or that it is selectively enforced. And so it's not that there is no law. It's that there is no law in practical terms. It replaces it with a system of ad hoc rules that whirls around and ultimately descends into racial absurdity. In that sense, the totalitarian systems and outgrowths of it are the bureaucratization of society. In a fully developed bureaucracy, there is nobody left with one whom you can argue, to one whom one can present grievances, which obviously is key, delivering your grievances, expressing your grievances in the American Constitution. On whose pressures, can be exerted. Bureaucracy is the form of government in which everybody is deprived of political freedom and the power to act. For the rule by nobody is not no rule, and where all are equally powerless. But then we have a tyranny without a tyrant, and by which there he means, quoting Hannah Arendt, an identifiable tyrant that would represent the focal point of resistance. It is a innocuous, pervasive, omnipresent, faceless bureaucracy that when you send your letter of complaint just disappears into the system. Okay. Ultimately, in such a bureaucratic totalitarian system, every psychological anchor that the law normally provides is lost. In place of the law is completely irrational and inconsistent rule system. In this way, our rationalist culture culminates in exactly the opposite of what it sought to achieve. And see, once again here, I think it's possible to critique that, in that it may be perverse to a objective standard, okay? It may be perverse in your mind's eye, but when you recognize what its end goal is, it may still be rationalistic, even if their end goal is to reduce the population per the Georgia Guidestones to 500 million people, down from 8.5 billion. Okay? So that is not ethical, it's not moral, it's not humanistic, it's not humanitarian. But does it have a rationale? Does it have a purpose? What do you think, Sam? Do you think it has a purpose? Is depopulation a goal?
Yeah, they tell us following Malthusian philosophy.
So it's not anarchy. It's not random. It's not chance. It is still focused on recognizing that you are a useless eater and you're breathing out too much carbon dioxide.
Well, yeah, the quote elite have claimed all the resources for themselves, and they need to get rid of us, or we're going to overload the system and collapse it. And so they're going to preemptively cut off the population to save the earth and themselves.
You're exactly right. I agree with you. There's only 2 more paragraphs here. Our audience will be delighted to know, even though you may have calls of marking this date on your fridge calendar so that you can celebrate your anniversary of analyzing a Belgian professor's essay. Because that probably doesn't happen very often. I'm boldly suggesting. The absurd, suffocating networks of rules first turn against those who do not want to go along with the system. But those who do engage with the system also fall prey to it, narrowly escaping, if at all, the machine that they themselves have built temporarily, because the monster always turns on those who have built it, whether it's Frankenstein's monster or an evil bureaucratic system. He says, in the totalitarian system, no one is safe. Everything and everyone can fall under the rules that are rewritten daily on the walls of Animal Farm by the pigs in charge. This gives us a glimpse of what the coming years will mainly bring. And this is important, this is the crux of it. Unimaginable chaos and psychological dislocation. And the only anchor will be precisely what our rationalist Enlightenment society pushed to the background. Loyalty to ethical principles, even if it means losing whatever you possess in the world of appearances. Now, there's two key concepts there that I'm going to briefly address. And somebody recently, I can't remember whether it was Zambri TV or Z Media, was espousing the virtues of the founding father. And I pointed out that they themselves were the establishment of their genre, and some of them recanted their signatures on the Declaration of Independence in return for pardons from the British monarchy. Okay, can you please go back to that document, Sam? I'm just rounding up here. I know we've gone over, but it is important. So if you just pull it back up, please. So there he's talking about people being willing to make sacrifice. Now, in addition to some of those people recanting, some of them actually betrayed the revolutionary forces in much the way that Benedict Arnold did. And it should be noted that whilst we espouse them as wonderful humanitarians who, wanted to espouse the freedom of man, that was only men, and it was only white men, to be clear. Many of them were actually slave owners, which was consistent with the policy of their era, but shouldn't be forgotten. Now, he suggests that the coming years are going to bring unimaginable chaos. Now, in the context of the 3%ers fighting admirably against the establishment, that may indeed be true, but he doesn't really seem to be implying that when he uses that phrase. So he's not talking about the fog of war. What he's talking about is the breakdown of any order in society. And I would suggest quite strongly, and I both put this in a comment to him very politely, and also in a comment attached to a quote tweet, that that phrase there is wrong. One, because we can imagine what it will be like very clearly, based upon past experience of other societies that have faced collapse. But in this case, it's not really collapse, it's a planned collapse and or a managed retreat, as we've seen.
Order out of chaos.
It is order out of chaos. It's exactly an excellent intervention there, Sam. And what we're seeing here is the classic Hegelian dialect, where it makes people feel like society is spinning out of control. And so they request more authoritarian control. And so that is the classic Hegelian dialect of problem, reaction, solution. It is not chaos. It is controlled disorder in order to have the muggles or the normies beg for totalitarianism, exactly as portrayed in the movie V for Vendetta.
All right.
And so that wasn't purely an intellectual digression on my part. We're really, really trying to introduce you to a lot of warning signs in society and tell you that even some of the most intellectual of right-wingers might actually be leading you astray, whether it's intentional or not.
It's
so
intentional.
as Sam says regularly, every show, do your own research.
Do your own research.
Form your own informed opinions. And one of the individuals who was the greatest prognosticator of that in the 20th century, ironically, since she was the wife of an ardent socialist, was Eleanor Roosevelt.
Sure. Simon, we're at an hour and 30. We got a couple more stories to get to.
So we'll bang through those quickly. We can go back to Zelenskyy tomorrow with his 5 points, because that's quite long to go through. So let's roll that to tomorrow. It's still incredibly valid. He made the speech to the assembled Ukrainian ambassadors today, but it's quite long. There's some key points to go through too. So it'll keep. I don't think World War III is going to happen tomorrow. There may be the day after, so please tune in tomorrow. So assuming that we rule out that one, what else do we have to go to very quickly, Sam?
We've got, yeah, we'll roll Russia and Ukraine. We already covered Ukraine or UK, so let's build on that. UK should be proud to see British weapons used by Ukraine.
So this has been produced story rather alarmingly. You'll all recall the Robin Williams movie where he says, "Good morning, Vietnam," which is like, American Forces Radio. In this case, that is the British equivalent. It's called the BFBS, which is not a long-winded version of BS, but actually does stand for British Forces Broadcasting Services. They produced an article essentially summarizing one that was put out by the new British Defence Secretary in the Sunday Express. And there he has two phrases that caught my attention. I appreciate that whilst they may be subscribers to the British Forces Broadcasting Services, they may not have had time to read this article, all of our dedicated listeners. He made two main points, one of which was that if you see British tanks fighting inside Russia, not in Ukraine, but inside the Kursk salient in Russia, then you should be proud that your taxpayer pounds are being used well, albeit that it may bring a nuclear retaliation against you whilst you're supporting Nazis that your grandfathers fought against, but completely ignoring all of those aspects. He also makes the point that we are at the crossroads of several conflicts. Now, our audience will recall, being dedicated listeners, that we relayed this point in Hebrew, as you do, from the Israeli defense minister yesterday, where he said that they were at a strategic crossroads. And allowing for the time difference, they actually were making this point on the same day, Sunday, right? So it's interesting that you have the British defense minister and the Israeli defense minister making the same point on the same day, okay? But don't forget, it was President Xi of China who had said that humanity is at a crossroads. So whilst we may think that they're good capitalists using our taxpayer dollars in the most efficient way possible to commit genocide and fight on the behalf of Nazis, they were actually citing a Chinese communist. So that should give everyone the maximum degree of faith in their decision-making prowess. But other than that, I would just like to say that our closeout song is from the same band that introduced our show today. That is the Beast in Black. And on this occasion, it's a tribute song to the thumbnail picture that we had, which relates to a post from one of the border supervisors in San Diego. And Sam, if you could please show that picture just so we can show how, like the World Economic Forum logo, the aircraft markings of this aircraft called Global Airlines X that is flying immigrants from all over the world into San Diego.
I'm glad they're all wearing masks, Simon.
Yeah, but we need to see the picture of the three X's, please. Can you zoom in? Great. So there we go. So you can see on the tail fin, the G is in fact a 6. The G of the word global on the body is in fact a 6. And the G on the engine cowling is also a 6. So their aircraft, I joke you not, is marked 666. And that is one of the airlines that are flying, not just walking through the desert, but actually flying illegal immigrants into the United States at the rate of tens of thousands per year through one of the cunning satanic State Department schemes. And isn't it appropriate that one of their satanic schemes would have an airline with their aircraft marked 666?
And the X is also a cult. I forget even what the meaning is, but that's also highly used in the cult.
Yeah. And amazingly, neither Mike Benz, who retweeted that, nor the original poster, despite including the picture in their series of pictures in their thread, appreciated that. And it struck me immediately. Okay? So no doubt Alex will focus on it in 2 or 3 days' time when he does the news the day after Weaponized News has covered it, as opposed to the news the day before the news actually happens, which unfortunately he's no longer doing. And so I hope that our audience will please consider most hard exercising their trigger finger in order to retweet, repost, share, and like our broadcast, which has been a bumper version today, and will consider giving us a $6.66 in celebration of the 666 on the Global Airlines X transportation from hell, which is indeed the name of the closeout song that we have for you today. Very campish, almost a parody of 1980s heavy metal, but lyrics are meaningful nonetheless. And frankly, the guitar is quite good. I'm sure Fat Bob will appreciate that. And so I thank our audience for persevering with us. And we will be with you at the same time or similar in the same place, same day, same location tomorrow, where we'll go over the Zelenskyy speech and also just tell you how miserable and pathetic Biden's farewell address, which he may well be giving now, but if not, within the next couple of hours to the Democrat National Convention, assuming, of course, they haven't been overrun by their Democrat stooges who are protesting outside currently. Some of whom, it has to be fair, are anti-genocide, which should represent the majority, if not all, of the American public opinion, because we're told generally that genocide is bad, as opposed to kill them all and let God sort them out.
On World Humanitarian Day. Thank you very much, Simon. Deep dive there into the intellectuals warning us about the coming tyranny here, which we're already in, by the way, but they're just going to continue to turn the screws on us here. You might want to speak out and say something that you don't like it at this point before they actually do send the killer drones to just wipe you out. So thank you very much for that, Simon. We got some shout out to everybody on BitChute. I see we have quite a few viewers on BitChute, so shout out to you. I don't know exactly how the live comments work there, but it's telling me we have quite a large live stream audience there. Shout out to everybody on the Rumble. Thank you for me curious in the comments. I see you there. Is there any quick ones I can get? The human trafficking case was horrific. Yeah, that's a horrific story. Maybe I'll read a little bit more and to give some more details about it, and maybe advocate for her pardon if it all sorts out that the worst that she did was steal his car or plot to steal his car, alleged by the prosecutors in that Washington Post article. She needs to be pardoned for killing her sex trafficker, I would say, if we have any justice, which we know we don't in America. And the racial component, she's black, the guy was white. I mean, come on, where are you at, social justice? We don't ever seem to get it for the actual correct cases. We just get the hoaxes, and that sends us down rabbit trails of destruction rather than real justice in this country. Shout out to Gene on the Rockfin there, and John. Thank you guys in the comments there for tuning in and keeping the banter going a little bit there. We do appreciate that. And then over on the Odyssey, I see a few people there. Thank you, Odyssey, and a few people on the YouTube. Thank you for tuning in on YouTube, and of course X. Thank you for tuning in there. As always, everybody do your own research. Peace, love, and liberty. Speak out and take action. Have a great rest of your Monday evening. We'll see you back here tomorrow to praise the Hillary Clinton speech. Here is Beast in Black from Hell with Love playing us out.